I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today's episode will be about George Pickens, not about Instagram posts, but about why I think he's the key to unlock the offense. That, Matt Canada being on the sideline, and why it could be a key to also boost everything, and why I think the Steelers defense is about to turn the corner. It's the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the #1 sportsbook in America. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Let's talk about George Pickens, y'all, for a minute, because I think we got to revisit this. We talked about this briefly with Alan on our Monday episode when we did our grades, because of course with Thursday night football last week, we had to push things around, change things up. So today we've already had our stars and skulls grades. If you missed them, go back on the Monday episode. We did them all there. We could talk about that. And I did give George Pickens one skull because of the missed toe tap and how that could have been a touchdown if he got that foot down. But again, George Pickens isn't the problem in this offense. He's not a problem even, really. I know people want to point to the pouting and the things like that. Sure. And his numbers the last two games aren't great. And his demeanor on the sideline didn't look great, and the Instagram posts seemed unfavorable. But this attitude comes with a lot of playmakers in the NFL. It happens everywhere. Diontae Johnson, in fact, used to do this. He used to post cryptic things on Twitter. Stephon Diggs still does it with the Bills every year, and it's why people still always think that he's about to break up with Josh Allen every 5 seconds. And yes, Antonio Brown did do that. But also, Antonio Brown, before he went crazy, which was a whole separate thing from what he used to be like, Antonio Brown, when he used to actually call for the ball, it was back in 2013. If you remember way back when, before he was a superstar, he was just an emerging #1 receiver for the Steelers. People were wondering, could he actually be a #1? Was he more of a #2? Everyone was wondering all those questions because Mike Wallace was about to leave. And then Antonio Brown was just said, throw me the ball in 2013. And all of a sudden, it clicked for Ben Roethlisberger. Oh yeah, throw that guy the ball. And then Antonio Brown burst onto the scene in 2013. And that led to the start of what eventually became the Killer B era. And we'll get more to that in a second. But that's where I think that the Steelers are in a situation where George Pickens has become a recognized threat. And there's structural reasons for Pickens to not get the ball right now. And again, I'm going to play this clip for you. Kenny Pickett talking about this. For those who are wondering, why isn't George Pickens getting the ball more? What's wrong with Matt Canada? Why isn't he calling more plays to George Pickens? It's less about calling plays that go to one specific person. It's more about calling plays that give the quarterback the options to take advantage of where a defense isn't. And again, here's Kenny Pickett talking about how George Pickens, even when he's not making plays, is helping the team.
What do you guys have to do to get George more involved in the offense? Seemed like I think he only had 2 catches for -1 yards.
Yeah, continue to move him around. He's going to get doubled a lot, and that's why you see Diontae get singled up, and Diontae's doing a great job on the other side. Credit to him. He takes 2 guys. The run game's opening up because of him. There's a lot of things that he's not getting credit for right now in the stat sheet, but he's helping us win football games. He's helping us have a lot of successful plays. So you definitely want to reward him. I wish we hit that one in the red zone on the fade, the slot fade, but continue to try and get him the football as many ways as we can, but just definitely want to appreciate him for what he does to the defenses. That opens up everything else.
So again, I've played that clip before on this show on the day after the game, but I wanted to bring that up again because Kenny Pickett says exactly what's going on there. And I've talked about this both on here and on my X account, Twitter account, whatever you call it nowadays. But you look at the all-22 and you can see teams, they're shadowing a safety over top of where George Pickens is, especially when he isolates one part of the field. And what Matt Canada is starting to do, and this is a good thing that Canada is doing, he's using that to create other opportunities elsewhere. When George Pickens is somewhere and he's attracting that safety attention, it's creating more space for other receivers to get open. It's also creating more space in the run game. That's what Kenny Pickett's talking about there, and that attracts guys to different parts of the field. It opens up Diontae Johnson. It opens up Connor Heyward. It opens up Darnell Washington. It opens up Calvin Austin, the run game, and eventually it will open up Pat Freiermuth as well when he returns. But again, it's up to Kenny Pickett and the offensive line when they're blocking, as well as the running backs to hit the holes, to maximize that. And I bring it back again to the 2010 Steelers, because if they do this, the offense will start to put up more yards and points, and then the defenses have to pick their poison. And again, the 2010 Steelers is a great comparison for what they went through to become who they eventually were. Teams started doubling Antonio Brown in 2014, because remember 2013, Antonio Brown was more like the emerging receiver of the Young Money crew with Emmanuel Sanders and Mike Wallace, and then eventually he became the star of that group. And when 2014, if you remember the start of that season, things weren't great. Things were still very much up in the air. People weren't sure if the Steelers offense was going to be really good. And then it was when Le'Veon Bell and the ground game started getting going and Martavis Bryant started being a factor that all of a sudden teams realized they couldn't just double Antonio Brown all the time. And that started to force defenses to have to pick their poisons against that team. And when that happened, there was balance. And that balance helped Ben Roethlisberger figure out, okay, this is what we'll do. This is what we'll take. This is how we'll attack defenses where they're not. And that is what Kenny Pickett has to do with this offense. But to get there, you need the emphasis on a star player, a player that attracts that kind of attention. And I think part of what the Steelers' struggles have been is that for the past year and a half or so, past 2 years, part of the attention was just stop the ground game, because we're not scared of the quarterback in the passing game yet. We're not, and I think that when you looked at what they've done, and I've said this since Najee Harris's rookie season, as soon as he was drafted, teams were like, okay, don't let him get started, and this offense is going to have a hard time finding that balance, because we'll put the pressure on a very old Ben Roethlisberger or a rookie quarterback or a young Kenny Pickett in his second year. And we're going to put pressure. We'd rather those guys figure out how to beat us with the other weapons than just letting him have space to run and get easy yards to make more convertible situations for that passing situation. And again, you're not asking. This is where ideally, if the Steelers maximize this situation with George Pickens, eventually teams will stop doubling him as much. Teams won't shade as many helps, because they start to realize, man, if Kenny Pickett's killing us with Diontae Johnson, we got to pay attention over there. And then when they start doing that, then you can go back to George Pickens, or you can go to other players. And then when you start hitting guys, that's when you start hitting guys, distributing the football, hitting guys in different parts of the formation, different targets. That's when defenses have the hardest time. To me, it was a shame that Ben Roethlisberger, not a shame like a bad on Ben Roethlisberger, but it was a shame for Ben Roethlisberger's end of his career that his knees gave out in 2020, because as I was saying on this show that year, that was the best I had started to see him distribute the football in his career, as far as evenly dividing it up and making sure that there was a new leading receiver almost in every game for the first 6 or 7 weeks. And that made it so hard for teams to predict, oh, he's not just throwing to Antonio Brown. He's not just throwing to Mike Wallace. He's not just throwing to Heyward. He's dividing it up, and it makes it so tough. Way back when, a great example, if you're a person who watches a lot of Super Bowls, go back and watch the Falcons Super Bowl against the Patriots. Everyone talks about, the Falcons blowing that lead and just everything falling apart. But if you go back and look at that game, what built their lead was Matt Ryan distributing the football to everyone not named Julio Jones. And then at the end of the game, when the chips were down and the Patriots were making a comeback, Matt Ryan stopped doing that, and eventually he just kept staring down Julio Jones. The Patriots were like, okay, and there was one great catch that Julio Jones made, but otherwise the Patriots like, okay, we're going to take away him and make him not the problem. But when Matt Ryan stopped dissecting the Patriots defense and going to different options, that made it so much easier for their defense to focus on you. That's what the Steelers want to do. That's what's going to be easier for Kenny Pickett if he can lock in. And sure, if George Pickens could just turn into Antonio Brown or Jerry Rice or Larry Fitzgerald or Randy Moss and become this guy that you could throw it to him no matter who's on him, that'd be awesome. But the best way to get this offense rolling is to find that balance. And if they find that balance, everything starts to get easier for everybody, because then George Pickens can't be doubled as much. Diontae Johnson won't be able to get doubled as much. The run game, because they're worried about those two guys, opens up a little bit more because they can't focus just on the run game. And then it's also going to open up the tight end position a bit more. But it all comes down to executing the things that are there, because when you start to do that, then you start to force them to guess. And when you got the defense guessing, when they guess wrong, it leads to bigger plays for you. And part of that, establishing that balance that creates that guessing game, is about getting hot. And if that Matt Canada being on the sidelines is part of that, that's something that has to continue moving forward. And I'll talk about more about Matt Canada being on the sidelines, because I don't think it's some huge schematic switch up like, oh, he's just on the field, so now he can see things field wise and it's better than him seeing things from the booth. No, I think there's more of a physical connection, a personal connection that is part of what makes that so important for the Steelers right now, and what could help make that an important change for the Steelers offense moving forward. I'll talk about Matt Canada and his impact being on the sidelines. On the other side of this, and we'll also talk some Steelers defense in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so stick with us. We still have a lot to discuss here on our Tuesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, and you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings start to roll in. Prize Picks is the new fun daily fantasy game that everyone needs to start playing right now. And with basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from their specials league. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. With the Prize Picks reboot policy, also, your entry stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For NFL games and college football top 25 matchups, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports game that gives you injury insurance. That is insane. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where every Tuesday Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. And Prize Picks doesn't just do NFL and NBA, they also do NHL, college sports, and so much more. Download the Prize Picks app today or go to prizepicks.com to sign up for play daily fantasy sports. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, and again, use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue talking about this Steelers offense, and I want to get back to this Matt Canada being on the sidelines thing, because this was a thing that kind of developed toward right leading up to the Titans game and them doing that, and they had the opening drive touchdown, and you could see him saying, "Let's bleep and go," and all this other stuff. And listen, if it helped them, it helped them. But as Alan said, they still only scored 20 points. It's not like it's a big thing, but I do think there is an advantage here. Now, one, let's also get some facts straight. Kenny Pickett didn't request this. This was more of a thing the Steelers were doing to, quote unquote, get a spark. And that's what Diontae Johnson said. I think that Mike Tomlin might elaborate more on that on today's press conference. We'll see what he says there. And who knows, maybe we're talking about that again on Wednesday. But I think the biggest thing is you saw Canada, and what Kenny Pickett also talked about, Canada's impact in getting to talk to different position groups and put things together a little bit easier. And Kenny Pickett talked about that and the impact that it has. And I think that where Matt Canada has to come into play is he has to find ways to get this offense to do things that everyone likes. Not that everyone likes, but for each element of the offense to do things that they're comfortable with and that they're excited to perform. They think that that plays to their strengths. For example, It's one thing to call, certain route concepts in a game, but you also have to call certain protection concepts, certain different looks that give you certain advantages when different fronts are aligned against them. Like, for example, how the Steelers might block an odd man front versus an even man front might be different, how the communication needs to happen and how they want to get matchups and how they want to ensure, hey, if you're going up against a guy like Aaron Donald, like they did with the Rams, how does the communication for double teams work, and who are the guys that have to be on alert to be aware that, like, hey, I can't trust that my inside gap is going to be taken because the guy that's lined up inside of me is taking on Aaron Donald with someone else. So I need to be able to monitor that while also doing my normal jobs if I'm like the offensive tackle or something like that. So those are the types of things that in games sometimes you have to get a feel for, and Matt Canada, it's probably harder to get a feel for that in the booth. And make no mistake, there are guys that operate well in the booth. That sometimes is how it works, but sometimes you need that connection. And this, again, may be Canada's biggest task, is finding that connection. It's what we've been talking about on this show. I've said for months now, I don't think Matt Canada's biggest problem has been play calls. There's some play calls you can always point to that, like, oh, that's dumb, but you could do that with Kyle Shanahan's offense. You could do that with even the most successful offenses. There's some plays that are always going to be dumb. But when you look at Matt Canada, I think the biggest thing is he hasn't been able to get to connect with these guys, to teach these guys to improve their execution. And if they improve the execution, as we see on the All-22, there's open plays on so many options. If they take those open plays, they take those easy yards that are sometimes designed for the offense to work, that's going to do so much more, and that's going to create that balance that we're talking about for the offense. And again, part of it has to be part of the feel of the game. Mike Tomlin said this, and I asked him this leading up to this game, asking about, hey, are you guys listening to the players when they tell you what they want in the offense? Are you guys taking that into consideration, or are you telling them to get in line? Mike Tomlin said they're consistently listening, continually was the word that he used. They're continually taking the intake from the players as far as what they want and how they want them. Listen, I think that Matt Canada being on the sideline, when they talk about a spark, I think it's just simply like, hey, they're just trying to figure out some way to try to generate the connection to execute more, because again, it's not about, they don't need some brand new whole brand new scheme right now. They need to execute the scheme that's right in front of them. They need to hit the open receivers. They need to make the blocks that are in front of them. They need to execute on the field. They do that, this offense will be so much better, because again, you're balancing things out. You're being tough to predict because you're hitting different guys and you're taking what's there in the defense. And if Diontae Johnson, what he said about Matt Canada, he said they wanted a spark. Sometimes the smallest sparks, because I think this is kind of a smaller spark. Matt Canada being on the field as an offensive coordinator, it's not saying, oh yeah, now he's going to see that that he should call more play action or something like that. That's not the issue. If the issue is if this does give a spark, if that does help bridge more connections in the offense, especially during the games as they maybe they feel things out a little bit better, that's where the biggest change in this Steelers offense can be. Sometimes the smallest sparks can lead to the biggest fires. And let's face it, this Steelers offense has been all about momentum and getting hot. You've seen the best games, especially at the end of the games, is when they start hitting and they start feeding off that each success. When you start looking at how they completed the deep ball against the Titans, that started to spark things for the offense. The Rams game, they hit one play, they started to hit 3, 4, 5. Even the start of the Titans game, they got hot early in that series and they fed off of that. And I said this about the Jaguars game. If Kenny Pickett and Diontae Johnson find a way to connect on that opening pass, it probably leads to a touchdown. If not on that play, I think that they catch fire, they get a little bit hotter, and that gets them the momentum that they're looking for. And it's all about getting hot. And again, it comes from that quote unquote spark that you're talking about there. And until Kenny Pickett, this offensive line, the receivers, and everything about this offense can consistently execute, this offense may just be about finding different ways to get hot right now until they find that. And what I think Matt Canada's biggest task in front of him right now is to build off of finding more ways to get this offense hot until that heat becomes consistent, and then it becomes that fire that we're talking about here proverbially. But and I think that when you start to see that, that's what's going to build more confidence in the offense. Again, taking it back to the mid-2010s here for the Steelers, and this is just the most recent iteration of Steelers offense that I'm bringing up for people to kind of picture in their brain. It was when one thing started to work, other things started to work, and you could build off of that. When Ben Roethlisberger started hitting started hitting Le'Veon Bell in the pass game underneath, and he would get those 5 to 8 yard runs, teams had to start paying attention to it more. That opened up deeper down the field, which got Antonio Brown more looks. That opened up, when they had to consider both of those guys. Martavis Bryant was open a lot more. That's why Eli Rogers was even a factor in the Steelers offense, because no one could even bother to look at Eli Rogers because of all the other weapons that were on the field. And you had one of the best offensive lines in the league. You look at all of those things that played in the Steelers' favor, then that's where they're trying to get now. Is you got to get hot to find different ways to succeed. And if this offense can find ways to get hot and then basically build off of that success, find ways to replicate how they get hot, that may be the very key that gets them to be an actual consistent offense until they get there. And you're not there until you are there. I think that's the bottom line that some people forget, is that you don't just wake up one day. There's no magic. You don't just eat a pill and just become the best offense in the league, or become an efficient offense. Even you don't even need to be the Steelers don't need to be the best offense in the league. They just need to be an efficient offense, one that can rank in the middle part of the league, like I've been saying all offseason leading up to this year. But the bottom line to me in this, when I look at this, is if Matt Canada being on the sideline simply gets a spark to help bridge connections a little bit faster in the offense, go ahead and do it. And if it's going to be the thing that sparks the fire, that leads to more hot drives where Kenny Pickett's seeing the right things in the right moments, and the offensive line is being on the same page with Kenny Pickett in the protection, or Najee Harris and Jalen Warren in the run game, and the receivers are feeling out the right spots to attack on different option routes, those are the type of things that I think start to change the tenor of an offense, change the tone of an offense that has been bad for so long. And if they are able to get hot more often, if they are able to get hot more than two drives in a game, and maybe turn that into 4 or 5 times in a game, then you're talking about that's more consistent. And you're building consistency, and then you're building an identity, and then you're putting things on tape that teams, again, want to take away. If you see, again, with the run game, if they start to see things they want to take away there, they'll try to jump all over that. But then if they're jumping all over that, they can't double cover George Pickens and Diontae Johnson. And that's where I think the Steelers are right now, is they're trying to find those hot things to build there to be consistent. And if they get those hot things, that can lead to the consistency. If they get that consistency, then this offense is right where it needs to be. And that doesn't have to be a top 10 offense this year. It just has to be middle of the road. Because right now, they're 30th in points scored and 29th in yards. That's not middle of the road. And they have time to get there. They have 9 more games. But if they get to middle of the road, even if it's not like, the whole year they've been in the middle of the road, if these last 9 games, they are an offense that can be middle of the pack in the NFL, that's enough with this defense. That's enough for this defense to help them win games more and win games in more comfortable fashions. And we have to talk about the defense because they're very much part of that. And if the defense takes the next steps that I think that they're about to, this team could be for real. But what are those steps? We'll talk about that after this next break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, before we get to that, we remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Get ready for the rest of the NFL season. The second half of the season is here, and there are incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets back with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 just if you just pick your team to win right now. So if you're a Steelers fan and you pick them to beat the Titans on a $5 money line bet, you got $150 $50 back in bonus bets right in your account, ready to go. And if you've been thinking of joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. You can download it right to your phone, and you can bet on anything from spreads to player props to over-unders and so much more. And all of those are things that you could take advantage of with those $150 that you win if you win on your $5 money line bet. So to take advantage of all of that, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the rest of this season with an offer that you won't want to miss. And that's at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here. We've talked a lot of offense. We've talked about George Pickens. We've talked about Matt Canada being on sidelines. We've talked about balance in this offense and that being the whole point. But let's talk about this defense for a second here. Could this defense be on the verge of turning the corner of an upswing? Last two games, they've looked stronger. They held one of the better teams in the NFL, the Jaguars, to 20 points, despite the offense being completely inept for most of the game. Cam Heyward has returned. They put up a very strong performance this past week against the Tennessee Titans. Minkah Fitzpatrick might be able to return soon. We'll actually hear from that. That'll probably be one of the biggest notes that Tomlin speaks about this week during his Tuesday press conference. So tune in for that at noon Eastern time. You've got Joey Porter Jr. actually starting and playing well. And I believe right now he's among one of the top cornerbacks as far as passer rating by quarterbacks that target him when they're throwing in his direction. Meaning he's being the corner they drafted him to be. And again, small sample size. Needed to play out a little bit longer. Need him to play against better quarterbacks. Need him to play against better receivers. But you like what you see so far. And his play could help balance the cornerback issues the Steelers have had this season. But if you want to wonder what kind of an upswing it would take for the Steelers defense to make here, and if it's even possible, let's look at what kind of an upswing they had last year, because they're at the same. This is the same point where things flipped for the Steelers last year when they went from their first 8 games to the last 9 games. The Steelers are 5-3, much better than what were they 2-6 last year. Much better situation than that. But totally, as a defense, let's look at the change that happened last year. From the first 8 games to the last 9 games. In the first 8 games, the Steelers were giving up 395.1 yards per game and 24.6 points per game. If they had finished the year with those marks, that would have been the absolute worst, the most of yards allowed by any team per game in the year, and that would have ranked 26th in points per game allowed. But in the last 9 games, it completely flipped. They averaged giving up 272.9 yards per game in their last 9 contests. And if you compared that with the rest of the NFL, that would have been first among all teams, even ahead of the San Francisco 49ers, who were the best defense in football last year. They would have, and that would have been about 28 yards per game better than that group. They also gave up 16.6 points per game in those games. That would have been second to the 49ers, 16.3. Now, ultimately, when you put it all together, they were a good defense last year because they gave up, their totals ended up balancing out to about 330.4 yards per game. That was 13th in the NFL, and 20.4 points per game. That was 10th in the NFL. But again, it was that flip in the middle part of the season that did that. Now, you do have to remember, part of that was also, of course, TJ Watt returned to the lineup, and that was a boost. But TJ Watt wasn't himself right away, and he still wasn't, he wasn't the all-pro caliber player because he was coming back from an injury. He still had that kind of talent in him, but it took him some time to get back and get healthy to impact games in the way that we see TJ Watt impact games all the time. But what you saw from the defense was that group played better as a whole as the year continued. The secondary was sharper. The linebackers got better. The defensive line got sharper. They knew where to go. They knew how to play together. All of that played major factors in that growth. So now, again, we looked at the first 8 games from last year compared to the last 9 games from last year. Let's look at the first 8 games this year. Right now, the Steelers are giving up 377.3 yards per game. That's 30th in the NFL. That's 2 spots up from last. But remember how many points I said they were giving up per game at the end of the season last year? 20.4. That's how many points they've given up so far this year. 20.4 points per game. That's good for 13th right now. And a big part of why I think this team can improve from that is, one, they're getting sharper. Two, I think that they got sharper last year as they grew together. But they are getting back talent. Cam Heyward is back, and Cam Heyward is a big part of this defense, even in his age. And as he's getting sharper, as he's getting better, he's only going to help the run defense and the pass rush. Then there's also the return of Minkah Fitzpatrick whenever that does happen, combined with the emergence of Joey Porter Jr. on the outside, of Keanu Benton playing better on the inside. You put all those things together, the return of Cam Heyward, the return of Minkah Fitzpatrick, the involvement of Keanu Benton, and the involvement of Keanu Benton as a player on the defensive line, the involvement of Joey Porter Jr. and the evolving of Joey Porter Jr. as a cornerback. You put all those things together, as well as this group just getting more in tune with each other and understanding how to play together more. Those type of things can help turn a defense around and turn a defense into a much better unit. And they already have been decent. Yards-wise, not so great. Points-wise, they're right where you want them to be. Now, let's make this clear. It's not all sunshines and rosies over there on the defense. Losing Cole Holcomb for the year, who was officially put on injury reserve, is a big blow because Cole Holcomb was playing very well. And the rotation of him and Landon Roberts and Quan Alexander was so good for the Steelers in the middle part of the defense. That now means Mark Robinson is going to have to play. And listen, Mark Robinson ain't no punk. That dude brings it and he can hit. But can he play consistent inside linebacker football in the NFL? That's a big question right now because coverage was not his strong point. That could weaken the middle. But I will say this, Quan Alexander and Landon Roberts, they've been up to the task so far. And I think the big thing the Steelers have to look at is they have to improve around them. They have to trust those two guys to do their jobs, but everyone else has to keep taking steps forward. The pass rush has to get better. The defensive line has to get better. The secondary has to get sharper in their communication. Diontae KZ was credited with being a big part of over-communicating to make sure that the communication skills that they lost to Minkah Fitzpatrick weren't lost in the game. Joey Porter Jr. credited him with that. And if this defense does do those things, if they can just continue to improve, I think that they can be a top 10 defense again. Because again, you're talking about the run defense being better, the pass rush being sharper. And you're also talking about better coverage because Minkah Fitzpatrick's back, Joey Porter Jr. is playing and playing well. And you're starting to build your packages off of that. And let's say they do those things, and they don't have to be number one offense, they're in top 5, but if they're a top 10 defense, and that's combined with an improved offense, and again, not a otherworldly improved offense, but just like get to middle of the pack offense with a top 10 defense, that right there is why I'm confident the Steelers are going to be a playoff team this year, barring any injuries, major injuries. Because I see the path forward for the offense. I see the path forward for the defense. And these are things that I've seen before in the Steelers organization under Mike Tomlin. And ultimately will be up to the Steelers to execute in those moments. Now, I will say it's also on the Steelers to make sure that they make the right calls personnel-wise. Because if Broderick Jones isn't in the starting lineup this week, I got major questions. I had major questions when he didn't start against the Rams. I said they shut me up because Dan Moore Jr. did a good job, but I was right back to howling with the way that they played against the Jaguars. And now you've seen 2 games with Broderick Jones in there. You got it, and he's played very well, and the offensive line's played well when he's in. So he better be staying in. But by and large, I think when you look at how the Steelers are set up right now, there are very walkable paths for both the units on either side of the ball to become much better than what they've been and to be able to come together to be a team that is a serious threat. We'll have all of that and more as we continue our shows here this week on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Thanks so much for tuning in. You can always find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Monday through Friday, talking all things Pittsburgh Steelers on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily episodes. We're back tomorrow with more talk on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.